No, who's teaching or comprehensive next?
It's actually not until training teaching.
I'm
not sure
Spring.
I think they're doing like a studio to see where it's at.
Oh man. Yeah.
It's all about that's necessarily the realism.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get started here. Today, if you guys can download under the class website, go under resources and family downloads. I added another section here called connections or connectors. And you just need to download the Glass Spider Connector Quad. Should be a 4-pronged spider clip. Everybody likes to do spider clips. I'm going to show you how to do a spider clip really quick. And then you guys can put that in your studio projects or in your hotel that you're working on. It's a lot easier than everyone makes it out to be.
You said it was the connector quad?
Yeah, connector quad. You can download the other ones as well, but I'm not really going to go into how we can manipulate all the singles and the doubles and where everything needs to be. I actually think we can achieve the single and the double just using the quad. I basically downloaded these from Revit City, and they have no parameters set to them. As I have told you before, sometimes you get these, at least someone modeled the spider clip, but there's just no parametric capabilities to them, so I'm just at the moment using them as a solid object. But you know, there are methods where we could just add some visibility graphics to the quad, and you can make it where you turn off the left top or the left right, the bottom left and the bottom right, and you'd still get the same configurations as a double and a single. So this would be an example where someone didn't really understand all the ways that you could add in additional parameters into one thing, and they ended up modeling probably the quad and then creating different files to achieve the same situation or configuration. So last class I started to get into working with the curtain wall system, and you know, we just looked at how we could add mullions and deal with you know, real basic a straight wall that you can divide up into grid systems, and then you know, apply a typical mullion that you would find with like an EFCO or Conair system. You know, just your typical 2-inch by 6-inch or 2-inch by 7-inch mullion. But when we get into wanting to do a little more complex systems, there are some quick methods that we could use, and we have to tweak a few things in Revit so that we can actually get a spider clip system to work with a mullion structural backup. You know, typically a spider system has a kind of a vertical pipe behind it, and you know, there might be some horizontal pipes every now and then. I'm not going to get into that detail, and of course they have cross bracing, and there's a lot of parts and pieces to the spider clip system. But just to give it a little bit of realism real quick, if we have the spider clip, which is one element, and then understand how to use the curtain panel properties of the curtain wall system, we can mimic structure behind it by creating that as a circular mullion that reacts and, or at least looks like it's connecting to where the spider clip exists. Now, I didn't go around and detail out the exterior condition. You know, typically you would have at this exterior side, you'd only have a double, and then at the top you'd have a single. That's why you have those other quads versus singles. But you know, if this was actually in a wall, you wouldn't see a lot of this other information. It'd be hidden in the wall, so I wasn't going to get too bogged down with modeling all that, but I can maybe show you quickly how you could go about turning these components on and off. And then we need to also get into how we place doors into a curtain wall system. For some of you that are in the computational practice class, it's a little bit of redundant of what we did today, but we're going to have to kind of piggyback on the classes back and forth a little bit. And then I also realized that we haven't really gone over column grids and structural columns yet within this class. And the reason for that is right now I asked you guys to lay out all of your rooms and try to get them laid out on your different floor plates and see what kind of leftover space you have. And of course I know you're going to have a lot of leftover space because I also just realized that we did a 1.5 gross square footage to net square footage calculation, which is like the maximum, you know, of inefficient floor plans that you could have. And I just realized in this program there was a little bit of circulation space accounted for, you know, but their ratio was more like 1.17. So they're planning on a very efficient hotel. So now that we've doubled, you know, we put the 1.5 and now we have an additional 1.17 on top of that, we're going to have some extra space left over, which that's fine. I think, you know, we'll just find some other programmed space that we can put into your hotel that might make it more unique from just the basic program. You could add more rooms, maybe more pools. You know, there is a requirement for a pool and a pool deck. It doesn't have to be a single pool, it could be, you know, on different floors. You know, we can start to think about what that leftover space is. But the reason I haven't gone over how to do the column grid spacing yet is because as an architect in the office, 9 times out of 10, you are going to be giving the structural engineer the column grid spacing for them to begin designing the structure. The reason for that is typically you want to come up with a module. So in this case, we have a very repetitive floor plan, or at least a floor room unit, a typical guest room in a townhome loft, or not a loft, but a 2-bedroom timeshare unit. As those lay out, you know, you've developed some kind of design for what that room needs to be, and then you're laying them out on a particular module. So once you have that module figured out, that's when we can start to add in column grids that would show the structural engineer exactly where you would like to have columns be placed, because you don't want to have columns end up in the middle of a room. And if you leave it up to the structural engineer, you know, they might try to be as efficient as possible and give you a 30-foot by 30-foot grid spacing, and that might not work with your actual module. So 9 times out of 10, you know, as architects, we will give the column grid, at least in schematic design, to the structural engineer. And then, of course, they will come back to us at other parts of the design process and say, hey, you know what, this column grid spacing between, you know, such and such isn't working for us. We have to, you know, do some modifications. So that's one reason why I think now would be a good time to start to introduce how to work with the column grid as well. But I want to go over the spider clip at the first part of class. So if you have downloaded the quad spider clip, let's just go ahead and open that family file wherever you've downloaded it, just so we can see how that was modeled. And you know, a lot of times you could do all of these modeling of these parts and pieces yourself, but a lot of times I will search first on Autodesk Seek and then Revit City just to see if someone else has started something, because there's a lot of model sharing going out there for parts and pieces in Revit, and that's really the point of BIM. A lot of times too, like I mentioned with the manufacturers, they're now getting involved with, or have been involved, so they're developing their parts and pieces. So you could actually I would probably look at Autodesk Seek, and then maybe even try to find a manufacturer who actually does a spider clip system, because they might actually have their parts done in Revit. And then, you know, your last resort would go to Revit City, so you can get the generic model that has no parameters in it. But looking at this spider clip, if we open this up, it's a glass connector quad. And if we open up the 3D view of this, this is basically just a generic model. So if you click on up here at the very top where it says family category and parameters, that will show you what template this was modeled in. And you can see it's just a generic model, so it didn't really fit any particular category, at least for the particular modeler who was working on this. Figured it was just going to be used as a generic model. And it's basically just a set of extrusions, you know, all these different pieces and parts that were put together based on, in a floor plan, there's just one reference plane, have this centered about the two reference planes. And then in elevation, it's just again centered at that location as well. There's no, parameters set. So if we actually look at the family types, there's no particular parameters. And what I was mentioning is there's really no reason to have the separate spider clip files, the ones that happen to say, the double and the single and the quad, because you could just take and actually add some parameters to this. And this is where, starting with what someone's already done, and if it doesn't have any parameters, that's okay, but since you know how to work with parameters, you can start to add and customize ways of working with this piece so that you can actually work with it in a more intelligent way. And so I could actually come up with a couple of parameters that might say, top left, and I'll just make all of these yes and no parameters. And we could make them an instance or a type. I'll make them all instances for now. And again, these are just yes/no parameters, so they're just a text or a checkbox that will either be on or off. And by creating each of these, I'm creating a top left, top right, bottom left. By creating the yes/no, we're basically just creating toggles of how we can change the visibility of this particular component. And I'm making them all instances just so I can customize them on the other end. And if you select and hover over, so I'm in the I actually think I did this before, and we have to be looking in the back view. Makes it so that our top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right actually works correctly. So I'm in the elevation back view. And if you just select over the components that happen to be in the right quadrant, top right quadrant, you can change under the graphics, the visible section. If you click on that button, we can assign that to be to the top right. Do the same thing with the top left, bottom left. And you don't want to select that centerpiece, just the kind of spider legs that come out. Bottom left and bottom right. Then I'm going to do a save as, and since I had an original file, maybe I want to keep that just as a base, just in case I added too many parameters and later on I decide I don't need them. But I might just add an underscore here and say something like with toggles or something. Toggles for toggle on and off. Just something to differentiate it from the original piece. So anyway, we have this 3D component now that has a couple of visibility graphics that we can turn on and off. And we can't really turn them on and off in this view, but eventually when it gets placed into another family type, that's when we can use those toggles. The next thing, what I want to do is go back into a project file. So you might want to just start a new project file so you're not, or you can work off to the side in your hotel unit. But I'm just going to be working in a typical new project. And what I did is in level 1 or wherever you're going to work, just go ahead and draw under home, wall, and let's draw a curtain wall. And I actually need to, I should probably start a new file. So just using the basic default curtain wall that is under here, let's just draw curtain wall 1 and draw a sheet of glass. Doesn't matter the length, but give it some length, like at least 30 feet or something. And we can also make sure that it's, by default it's already 20 feet high. You can make it something like 20 feet high or at least something greater than 10. We also want to create our 3D default view. And the last thing I'm going to do, because I started a new file, is I'm changing my glass material so that my surface pattern has a solid fill shading and a light gray when I'm looking at the hidden line view. I'll do that all the time for glass, just so that when you're working in your construction documents, it actually, you can identify what's glass and what isn't. It's kind of become a little bit of a standard working method. So the next part is I need to, in a floor plan view, look at this in elevation. So whatever way that you drew your particular curtain wall, look at it straight on, either from the front or the back. And we can divide this up with a grid. So using the home and then the grid component, just go ahead and place a couple grid lines, maybe in the horizontal and the vertical. I'm not going to really worry about the spacing. I just want the ability to eventually select a panel. So if you remember, you can hover over your grid system and then tab, and it cycles through your curtain wall, cycles through the grid line selection, and then also cycles through the system panel. Now the way to get the spider clips to work, and then also the way to work with our backup structure, we're going to have to do a couple additional parameter instances and a couple toggles to make it work based on a basic Revit template. And right now, remember each of these panels, when we tab over it, it's actually called a system panel. And in the project browser, if you scroll down in the project browser and unexpand or expand the families section, you should see where you have curtain panels and curtain systems that you can, and curtain wall mullions, which are 3 parts of your project browser that you can expand. And one of them, under curtain panels, you have system panel, and there's a glazed and a solid version, and then there's an empty panel and there's empty. That coincides with if you happen to select one of your panels. So again, tab over until you can left click and select on a particular panel. And then in your properties pull down menu, this is where you can see where you have the system panel glazed, system panel solid, and the empty system panel, which would just be empty, to basically make this disappear. In order to get more of, or start to customize our own system panels, we actually need to go under the View, User Interface, and Recent Files. And instead of starting a new family, I'm going to open an existing family that already came modified or started in Revit. So again, we're starting with something that was already started and using that as a basis to then add to and manipulate based on additional information that we have. So once you hit open, you should come to your U.S. Imperial Library, and under curtain wall panels in that folder, I want to select there's only 3 options. There's an empty panel, glazed, and solid. I want to pick the glazed panel as my starting point. And again, we're working with glass, so I'm going to do my standard manage, materials, glass, surface pattern. Oh, and we can't use that solid fill here, so we won't worry about that. Never mind. I'll just turn it on shaded so we can see the blue glass color. Now if we look at the system panel, all it really is a sheet of glass, and it has a few parameters set within it. So in the project browser, I can look at the floor plan, and you don't really see any parameters, but if you left click on the extrusion and then click on edit extrusion, you'll see that there are some parameters that get revealed within the extrusion sketch. And there's an offset and a thickness. So consequently, you can look at the family types dialog box, and those are the only two parameters that are available. Is a thickness where we can change the thickness of the glass, and then the offset, which is basically the offset from probably the exterior face of the wall or a curtain wall system. I'm not going to mess with any of that. I'm just going to exit out of it. So just wanted to show you that sometimes there are parameters that are hidden within the edit extrusion components. And so when you start to get families from other sources, and then also if we're starting from like a basic Revit template, we have to know how to find out where those family or those parameters are actually being applied so that we can modify them. If we look at the exterior view, you'll just see in elevation just a couple of reference lines, and there's no parameters set to any of these lines. But in this template, this is set up so that this sheet of glass is going to expand to the grid lines of your curtain wall panel system. So whenever you divided up your curtain grid, this is how the glass knows to stretch to that reference plane. And this will come in handy in a little bit when we have to manipulate this a little bit further. So to work with any kind of connectors and clips and anything that you want to add to a curtain wall panel, what we want to do is add them to this particular file. And since we started with a Revit based file, you know, we opened up a file that came with Revit. Before I continue, I always do a save as family and go ahead and save this in whatever folder you're currently working in. I might call this glazed panel, and I'll call this whip spider clips. Is anyone doing spider clips in their studio projects? And now you will. Seems like everyone wants to do spider clips, especially I would recommend it if you can in school, because when you get out there in the real world, those are very expensive systems, and so we always end up with the nice stick-built 2-inch by 6-inch mullions. And so if you can have some fun now, this would be the time to do it. Otherwise, or you could hopefully find an owner that you can persuade to get that type of system in there. You know, downtown there are a few installations where there is the spider clip system, but you know, there's just some pretty nice ritzy kind of buildings. If you guys have ever been downtown and seen the trading floor at the Hearst Tower, has that big glass box. That's all spider clips and the truss system. It's pretty interesting, but anyway, it's very rare that I've ever got to do any, so if you can, now's the time. All right, and then you can show it in your portfolio too that you know how to do it. That's the other important part. So looking at this particular panel, if you have your spider clip open, I'm going to go to just switching my windows. I'm going to switch into, it doesn't matter which view, but just the ability to switch back into that view so that we can load this spider clip into our glazed panel with spider clip file that we've been working in. So I'll hit open, and for right now I'm just going to place it off into space somewhere. I'm not going to really align it to anything at the moment. One thing I want to do while we're in this view, and you should be in a floor plan view in order to place this particular file. The way that it was set up as a work plane being a floor level, and so we have to be in a floor plan view in order to place it. You'll notice if I'm in a exterior elevation and I click on component and try to place it, I get the no sign, that Ghostbuster sign that says that I can't place it at this particular section. So once I flip into a floor plan and then also hit home and component, then I'm able to place it. So sometimes some of these models that you download from other people or even get from Revit, there's very particular rules of how it can be placed. And so if you can't place it in one view, you may have to switch to another. And there's really no way to edit that without a lot of redrawing. I'm also going to click under my family types since we're in here, and I'm going to change that offset from 1.5 inches, and I'll just change that to 0. And you'll see that that brings the sheet of glass to that reference line, which happens to indicate, doesn't really have any name to it, but that's probably the exterior face of the glazing. Next, I'm going to use the align command, and I'm going to align the spider clip to this reference plane that's on the left. And you'll see that as you hover over, you'll start to be able to select the center point. That's because this model was modeled about the center reference plane of that model environment. It had those crosshairs, the vertical and horizontal. And because those crosshairs were there, you're able to select that center point. Once we do that, we want to lock it, because no matter where this reference plane ends up, you also want the spider clip to follow. And then the next part is I want to actually select the face of the glass, and then the inside face of kind of this part of the spider clip that's floating out in front. And then once I do that, I also need to lock it into place. Now if you look at that in 3D, that basically places that spider clip on the corner down at the bottom, and also if you look in the elevation, you see that it's at that location, kind of centered about that corner. So I can place another one of these. I go ahead and click on Home and Component, and again I'll do the same thing, make it float off into space, and I'm going to set the same method up with aligning and locking to the same parts, but on the other side of the opposite side of this piece of glass. And again, if you look at your exterior elevation, you have your clips showing up right there. Now the top plane is going to be a little bit trickier, and this is where knowledge of reporting parameters comes into play, and that's why we kind of did all this complicated stuff at the very beginning, because you already know a lot about parameters, and knowing how to set up reporting parameters and how to use them will allow us to get this spider clip up to the top plane. You'll see that when you select one of these spider clips, you can see that our base constraint under level, there's only one option, and it says baseline. And you can see in elevation that it also has a reference baseline here. And under home, I have no way of creating another datum line. And even if I name this reference plane something, I'm still not able to select it as a method for placing the spider clip. Don't ask me why, but you have to work within the system. And so what I need to do is figure out, if this is my template that I'm given, how do I get my spider clip up to this particular location, and then also get it to move with the panel. This is where, if I just go back into the floor plan, let's just go ahead and I'm going to control, let's do a home component and place another spider clip, just one more. And again, I'm going to align this to the reference plane on the left and lock it. And I can also do the same thing where I align it. So basically I'm going to be doubling up exactly where this other spider clip has been placed. And you get an error that says, you have identical instances in the same place, and that's okay for now. So now when I'm in this elevation, I actually have in my front view, let me go on the interior view. There we go. Look at your elevation in the interior view. On the left side, you should be able to select, and down at the very bottom here, it'll tell you that you've selected 2 instances of something. That's how you can start to see, if you've selected only 1 or 2 or multiple items. this little filter and then the colon mark down at the bottom right, and then the numbers. You know, if you start to select more than one item, it'll start to give you a count of what you've selected. So I can identify that that's the spot where I've modeled both of these instances. And if I click on one of them, I can see that if I just hover over the glass extrusion, that the way that this particular piece of glass was modeled, it was actually modeled in plan as a sketch that had those thicknesses and the offset parameters set to them. And then it has a start extrusion at 0 and an end extrusion at 8 foot. And it's just shown at 8 foot for now. There's no rhyme or reason to it, it's just showing that pane of glass. So if I actually want to get this spider clip to go up to the top, I also have to change this to have an offset of 8 foot. And that should pop it up to the top. I'm just going to go through this example here real quick and show you how this is really not going to work to our benefit. But we need to kind of go through the process to look at how this is working out. Let's place another spider clip on the other side and do the same thing. So home component, got my spider clip, align, lock, align, lock, and then in elevation on the other side, take one of them and take it up 8 feet. So that gives you your sheet of glass with spider clips on all 4 corners. And so we can go ahead and save this and load it into our project folder or project file. And if we look at our piece of glass in elevation, this is where you can tab over, select one piece of glass, and actually let's pick one of these that are in the middle. And then in your properties bar, down at you'll have to scroll down towards the bottom. You should see a glazed panel with spider clips shown, and then click on that. And notice what happened. The glass stretched to the right locations, stretched to the boundaries of the grid line, but those spider clips are exactly 8 feet above because that's exactly what we just set it to do. So what we need to do now is we've tested that. We know that the bottom ones will always work because those are in reference to the 0 plane. But these ones at the top are a little trickier. So I need to go back into that family. And let's create a parameter that would report some information back to us that we can then set our spider clips to equal that particular parameter. Create a dimension string from reference line to reference line. And if I create a new family type, not a new family type, but a new parameter under family types, let's just call this, well, we just call this height. And make it an instance. And then remember to check reporting parameter. Because this panel is set up to stretch, kind of like our curtain panel pattern-based families, they're going to stretch into place. And so we don't really know what this dimension is going to end up being. So if we have it report some information back to us, and I might change where it's located, do modify, maybe I'll put it under analytical alignment. Alignment sounds like a good spot. Doesn't matter, but. And then we can set our dimension that we just placed under label, and then also set that to height and 8 foot, or the reported parameter. Now the last part would be to select both of these spider clips that are at the top, and instead of typing in 8 foot as our offset, we should be able to press this button off to the left, and then make that associated with the height, and save this and load it into the project. And once you override it, your spider clips move into place. Because it is reporting whatever this height is and then telling those spider clips to offset from that position.
Jeremy, I think the offset that we did moved the glass panel back. Because if I look at mine in 3D and Ryan has the same thing, it looks like it's off the wall.
Yeah, that's because in our, if we actually click on the actual overall curtain wall system, and if we look at the edit type for that wall and scroll down, nope. That's because the other glass panels that are associated with it have some offset, probably at 1.5 inches that were already inherent with it. So as we change all of our glass panels, they'll move back into place.
Okay.
So yeah, it will be offset at the current moment. So now a quick way, instead of having to go back and let's say you drew this curtain wall system and it happens to be 100 feet high and you've gone ahead and divided it up into 1 million different grid pieces, instead of going around and selecting each one individually, we might actually just go ahead and under curtain wall, click on edit type if you have your curtain wall selected. Let's duplicate this curtain wall and call this curtain wall with spider clips. And you'll see one of the options at the very top under the construction makeup of the curtain wall system. It has a curtain panel and it's set currently to none as a default. If you now have that panel as an option to select, we could by default just say that every panel on this system will be our glazed panel with spider clips and hit OK. And then you've applied that grid system all over your whole entire wall. So if you were able to change your dimension of your wall, let's say I make it 60 feet long, look at it in one of my elevations, and if I add more grid lines, you will start to get more spider clips to appear. So I can start adding grid lines, and for each division I make, I end up with spider clips on all the different corners. Now, we are going to have double spider clips on all the corners, so you're going to have more than one clip. We could just model one spider clip on one corner and eventually, it would repeat everywhere, but then we would be missing spider clips at the corner conditions. So for right now, I'm not going to worry about the double instances of the spider clip. Again, you have to kind of work within the system from time to time. So the next part is I'm going to add in some structure, and then we're going to find another problem with the curtain wall and the way that it works, and we have to discover a way to work around it so that we can get the design that we want. A lot of times in Revit, there's so many different tools that you've already noticed and different ways of modeling, and you cannot let those tools limit your design ability. We have to figure out how those tools are working and then go back in, because we know how to work with parameters, start to manipulate the system and then get the system to react to our design. A lot of times you'll see a lot of people, will say, you can't do that in Revit, or I can't get that to work, so it must not be possible. And that's not quite the case, as you've already kind of experienced with the complex geometries. So I want to add basically a vertical pipe that's going to be associated with the grid system. And the reason I'm not going to model this as a separate structure, you could come in and actually just draw a couple columns that are associated with the grids. But if you add more grids, you're going to have to add more columns and so on and so forth. If we think about the columns in the back as being a mullion that works within the curtain wall panel, we could just add a circular mullion that would act as a column, and if we place it in the correct location, we can get this to work out and show it like a particular structural system. So I'm going to just go into just go into a floor plan view, and we can zoom in. This would really need to be in an elevation, sorry. One that's perfectly looking at the glass. And if you remember, in the last class, we went over how to start to place mullions. So if you're in the elevation view or 3D, you can click on mullion. And then over to the left, there are other properties and different mullions that we can place. By default, Revit comes with a template, and these are really the only shapes that we can use at the moment with Revit. So you've got circular mullions, L corners, quad corners, rectangular mullions, trapezoids, and Vs. I'm going to use the circular mullion, and I think 2.5 inches in diameter is probably going to be kind of small. So we might want to edit this and maybe make this a, let's go with a 4-inch pipe column. That might be more realistic. We'd probably have to look at the actual spider clip system, but I think this will look a little bit more realistic. So what we need to do is edit the type, because we always start with the 2.5 or the template. I'm going to duplicate it, call it 4 inches, circular. And then if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's a radius dimension. And if this is going to be a 4-inch circular, we need a 2-inch radius. And I'll click OK. And now on this system, I'm only going to place a mullion on a grid line. I'm not going to do all the grid lines, because this pipe column, in this particular instance, usually it's just a vertical pipe column, and then every now and then you might have some horizontal members that we can go into a little more detail at another time. I'm just going to deal with the vertical at the moment. So if we click on grid line, and then you just click over each grid line that you want a pipe column. And yes, you're going to see something that doesn't look right as you do this. What Revit does is, if we look at a floor plan view, it wants to place this as a mullion that's cutting the glass and leaving a space for the system. And so basically it's moving that reference line on either side of the column, or the mullion that we've placed. The next thing I want to do, though, before we fix this problem, is I also want to offset this circular column so that it's actually at the back face of the spider clip. So I'm going to measure, actually, to the center line measurement from the back face of the spider clip to the center of, I wonder if we can do to the edge of the circle. Yeah. We can do to the back edge of the circle is 6 and 5/32. What that will allow me to do is I can pick just one of these circular mullions, and if I go into the edit type properties, there is an offset that's set to 0. We could change this to negative, I'm going to try negative first because I think that works. Negative 6 and 5/32. And hit OK. And all of your mullions will now go to the back face of the spider clip. All I did was select the mullion, edit type, and then change the offset to 6 and 5/32 of an inch.
Negative 65.
Yep, negative. Everyone get that to work out? You're going to notice that it didn't solve our problem with the glass, though. You would think that the glass would return back to itself, but it treats this as a mullion that should be cutting through the glass, and so it still kept that void right there. Everyone to this part? So what we need to do now is fix this problem. Again, this is where we're recognizing what Revit does with the tool and then figuring out how we need to adjust it. We obviously need to come up with some sort of offset from those reference lines that were the boundary of the glass that we could manipulate and tell the glass to go back to its original location, which should be whatever the thickness of this circular, or this radius is. So we basically need this to offset 2 inches and get this glass to move back into place. And so all I'm going to do is go back into my glazed panel looking at an exterior elevation. And we don't want to manipulate any of these existing reference planes that are already associated with this glass panel. As soon as you do that, you're really going to start to kind of mess up the way that Revit works and tries to think about how to stretch this piece of glass. So what we want to do is add in our own reference lines and then work from there and start to add to this component. So in this elevation view, I'm in an exterior, you could be an interior, it really doesn't matter. I'm going to click on Home, Reference Plane. Now I'm just going to way off to the sides on the top. Make sure you draw in a horizontal manner and vertical manner. Just kind of far off into space, get your additional reference planes to float, and then I also might just drag my endpoints just a little bit beyond one another. Then I'm going to add in an offset dimension, and I'll just do one parameter, and later on you might have to get a little more sophisticated depending on the actual system of your spider clip system. The horizontal and the vertical members might end up different when you actually look at a real condition. You may have to have a horizontal offset and a vertical offset, but to save time, let's just create a parameter called offset. And we already have an offset labeled, so we probably want to call this something more like maybe glass extension, because we can't use the same parameter name that's already came with this curtain panel. And this will be a length. We'll keep it as a type, and then OK. And for right now, let's give it a large dimension of like 1 foot. By the way, what I'm not really going to explore further is at the very beginning of the class, we set those toggles for this particular spider clip. And if you click on one spider clip, you'll see to the left you have your top left, top right toggles. And so if you start playing around with the check marks, you can start to see how you can toggle on and off. And of course, I'm actually looking at it the right way. Bottom left turned off. Yep. Top left. So you can see how just by setting up those yes/no parameters, we can just toggle that on and off. And then later on, you can get more detailed if you really wanted to toggle if this is going to only have a 1 prong or a 2 prong at all the intersections. You'll drive yourself crazy if you try to get into that much detail at the particular moment.
Do those parameters come into the model?
No. So what happens is, since the spider clip was a family, this family is getting embedded within this family. Those instance parameters only travel one family at a time. So we can only toggle those on and off in this family. And what you would end up really doing is, because once this gets into the project environment, you can really only select panel types, because remember we were referencing in the, when you clicked around in the grid system, you would toggle and select from the pull down menu the ability to select a type of panel to be placed. And so what you'd have to do in this particular environment is set up, right now we just have a family type called glazed panel. You'd probably have to come up with a couple different configurations that would have, glazed panel, and then you would toggle on and off your instances, set that type. And what you're going to have to do in order to make that happen is we would have to add in a lot more yes/no parameters in here that reference these parameters. So you can see it'll get kind of embedded and pretty deep. But if you do set it up, what you're basically doing is, instead of toggling these on and off over here, you're setting this button to equal a yes/no parameter that's now in this family environment. And then you could toggle your different, yeah. Right now, there's no way to reference. It'd be nice if you could, kind of like in Excel, reference another file and pull parameters, but right now there's really no way to kind of transfer that data except kind of making a new parameter equal to the other. That's why I'm not going to go into too much more detail on that, because you can see how that'll get pretty complicated. The next part will be, I'm going to strike some dimension strings to all of these reference planes that we just created. And we want reference plane to reference plane. And I can set all of these to equal the label called offset, or not offset, glass extension. Then if I select my glass, I actually want to disassociate how it's currently locked to the reference planes. And one way I can do this, and one of these sides is not going to work out, and I'm going to tell you it should be the left one if you're looking on the exterior, and I'll tell you we'll find a way to fix that. But if you drag the drag handles until you snap to the next grid line, that's where I'm going to lock these panels. And every now and then you'll get a constraint's not satisfied. You got to remove the constraint. Go ahead and do that. Do the right side, the top and the bottom. Remember to lock. Sometimes your padlocks get hidden on top of each other. And this one on the left, I try to move it and nothing happens. And so what I'm going to do is look at the floor plan. Because this was modeled in a floor plan view, we can edit the extrusion. And I'm now going to move that sketch and align that edge of the sketch to the reference line and lock it. Did you edit the sketch? You're in edit sketch mode in the plan view. And if you have remove constraints down at the lower right corner, hit remove constraints. Should be good. Yeah, on my bottom one, when I clicked on lock, it was actually hidden under this other lock. And so if I toggle, you can see if I left click on it, another padlock showed up to the left of it. Sometimes, unfortunately, your padlocks get hidden on top of each other. And so you may have to click on a couple of those to find it.
I don't see one on the bottom.
We'll look at it in a little bit here. So the next part I'm going to do is test out that my extensions work. And if I go back and change my glass extension to 1 foot down to, we're really eventually going to want it to be 2 inches, and hit apply, should see everything worked out except for my bottom piece of glass. which now I can find my padlock. So sometimes I've changed my extension from 1 foot down to 2 inches, and then I need to test this out one more time, make sure this works. So let me go back up to 1 foot. Sometimes you have to play around with those dimensions, and then you're able to snap your glass in place.
Jimmy, how did you get to snap that one side in the base view?
Yeah, so in the floor plan, if you're in the baseline view, I clicked on the actual extrusion, and you should get a option up here to edit the extrusion. Once I did that, I went into the sketch mode, and I aligned that vertical sketch line to the plane, and it will say remove constraints, and then I locked it.
Gary?
Yeah.
I'm getting an error every time I try to make these labels a glass extension. Since labeling this dimension would overconstrain the sketch. It doesn't give me like a button to like override it.
Let's look at that in the class. Basically, when you started with your overall reference lines, did you have them far away and at least 1 foot away? If you happen to have them real close to the reference plane, it could be that Revit's getting confused with where that glass is supposed to be locked, and you're basically trying to apply a you're kind of over constraining the sketch is what it's saying. Sometimes you get that and it's frustrating, and you kind of have to back away and start over, maybe delete those dimension strings and just go far enough away. The next thing I'm going to do, and maybe I'll keep my glass extension back to 1 foot, just so that I'm dealing with a fairly large extension that makes it obvious that I have to move my spider clip to a particular location. Now, what we need to do is be able to also move our spider clips to our new location of where this glass extends. And in order to do this, we need a couple more parameters to make this work. The first one is easy. We can just use our align tool. If we align the vertical, and if you kind of zoom in where you can only select not the reference line, but the spider clip center line, and again, remove the constraints, unlock it, and do the same thing on the other side. This is the easy one because we don't have to really set a parameter to make this work. We'll know that it always works because we're locking it to this reference line that already has a parameter. And I locked it to that reference line as well. Now the next part is I need the spider clip to move down the glass extension and up the glass extension. So we basically need a negative version of the glass extension to move this one down at the bottom down. And then we'll need another parameter that has a calculation where we calculate the height plus the glass extension to move this other one up. So if you just click on adding parameters again, let's call this, label it under constraints, group under constraints. Again, that's just a preference. I will make a parameter called spider, let's just call it spider clip bottom and spider clip top, and it will be a length. There will also be a type. The one that's on top will be a spider clip top. This will be grouped under constraints, but this one will need to be an instance parameter because we're going to be referencing that reporting parameter as an option. and we can now use some computational formulas to make our spider clip bottom. We'll call it, first of all, I'm going to highlight glass extension and Control C that so I don't have to type this out all the time. Now I'll type in negative, Control V, glass extension. And spider clip top will be, let's see, we need the height plus Control V, glass extension. Pull up my magnifier here, if you guys need it. Alright, so everyone got that? Let's hit OK. And then if you click on both of these bottom spider clips, we can make the offset under properties equal to spider clip bottom, and do the same thing with the top, but make those equal to spider clip top. And go ahead and save that. And then since we know that we're modeling with we really just need a 2-inch extension, and we've just modeled it with a greater than kind of this 1 foot dimension, let's just go ahead and under glass extension change this to 2 inches. And later on, as you get more complex and if there's more different sizes of members, you can create a new family type and then just change the glass extension to whatever it really needs to be. And we can hit OK, save this, and load it into our project. Overwrite this existing version. And what happened is we actually did an extension on the top and the bottom. And I guess for our purpose, we really only needed to do the sides. So one last thing, I can easily fix that. So I've got glass extension all the way around. Let's just add one last parameter. It could be glass extension sides. Because we did all the computational formulas with the ones that are up and down, I don't want to go back and change all my formulas. I'll just call this glass extension sides, make that type, make that 2 inches, and change these 2 on the sides to equal that parameter. Then I could change my glass extension, make that go to 0. This way, later on, we have the option so that when we start to add in horizontal members, you can get it to work out. And hit save. So now you have a spider clip system. You should be able to render and see some glass, and then you see the structure behind it, and then the spider clip system. And if you really wanted to get more detailed with this, what I've seen people do, and you can kind of see in the rendering here, you do see the edges of the glass, but I've seen people take that glass panel and add a little black edging to it, so you get kind of the sealant look. and then you can get the divisions of your glass a little bit better, or you can gray it out or something like that. So there might be some additional items to model in there eventually.
So would that work on like a complex surface?
So if you had a complex surface that is twisting and bending, remember this works great for a straight up and down wall. You would need to take this spider clip and bring it into a curtain panel pattern-based family and place it at the corners. And that might get a little complicated just because of the way that everything would twist and turn. You might start to see kind of duplicate spider clips. But if you only put like one spider clip on a corner, that'd probably work out pretty good. Because from panel to panel, it's your glass isn't twisting that dramatically. And actually, looks pretty good in the rendering once it gets to the final piece there. I'm going to cancel that. One last thing I want to do is in a curtain panel system, and the reason I'm doing this too is, you're going to have interior spaces as well as your exterior facade that you're dealing with. So you might have an interior atrium that could have glass that might be more straight up and down. You also have probably some basic windows that we'll go into in another class that you might place into the interior side of your hotel walls and rooms and so forth. But this is a quick way to make your vertical wall, and you could apply this to a curtain wall systems. You can actually apply to a slanted wall as well, but it has to be only slanting in one direction. You can't have it a mass that kind of tweaked in a couple different directions. If you just had it kink out, I think it would work as well. I haven't tested it out, but we can explore that. But one last thing I want to do is looking at a curtain wall system, how do we place a door into it? And if we look at a floor plan, and of course, I'm not going to use the spider clip system at the moment. Let's just use a regular wall and create I'm going to go back to just a plain curtain wall, not the one that has a spider clip. And if I look at that in elevation, so I've got my other sheet of glass to the side. Again, under home, and then divide this up into some grid items or grid pieces. And this time I'm just going to apply mullions to all the grid segments. And for right now, I'll just make this our 2.5 inch by 5 inch rectangular mullions. Now let's say I wanted to place a door into this piece of glass at this location. So far we've gone over how to place doors into a typical wall assembly, but curtain panel doors work in a slightly different way, and we have to be using the right project template. First thing I want to do is delete the base mullion that was applied, because I want to eventually be able to select this system panel that is glazed. And right now it's showing that this system panel, it has a width of 4 foot 5.5 by 12 foot 3 3/4. You'll have something different. But essentially the way that the doors work are very similar to any other curtain panel system. They stretch into place. And so if you want to place a typical size door in here, you'd have to make sure that you tab over your grid lines. And of course they measure to the center line of the grid. And so I might want to make this more like, let's do 8 foot 1 1/4. What does that do for me? That makes it 8 foot high door. And then my width, I might, play around with these dimensions. And you can tab over and read this. I'm now a little bit short, but anyway, you can keep playing with the dimensions until you get it. Well, I'm close enough. I've got like a 3 foot and a half by 8 foot. But anyway, that would be the information that eventually gets reported to a door schedule. So if you really don't want any kind of odd custom doors and you want to actually work with system doors that you would actually buy, you would have to play around with that grid system until you kind of carved out a spot for where that door needs to be located. Then the door systems are a family type. If we go under user recent files, and I'm going to open under the US Imperial Library, if we open up the doors, we can click on any of these files that are listed and kind of tab through. And you can see a little preview off to the right. Those are all the doors that come with Revit. But there are 1, 2, actually I guess I must have saved a different door type here. You should have probably like 3 door types. You have a curtain wall double glass, curtain wall single glass, and curtain wall storefront double. Those are the templates that are available to bring into any kind of curtain wall system. And so to be simple, let's just go to curtain wall single glass. I'm going to open that, and you'll just see that, again, it's kind of a simple door, but the reason I'm using this is it already has the door swing in plan. It has the flip arrows. It has all these parameters already set, and I don't want to have to go back and start from scratch and model all these components again. And later on, we can add in some frame, make this so it's not just an all glass door. But we can load this into our project, and I'm going to load it into project 1. That's where I've been working. And when I look at this in elevation, now that it's loaded into the project, if I tab over this system panel, I can now select from the left. You should see another, so we had our glazed panel with spider clips. We also have glazed wall single glass. I've now placed a door, and in the floor plan view, this is where you can click on it and flip and get the door swing to be in the right location. This is a door that can be tagged and scheduled, and it acts like other doors. However, it had a slightly different template that works directly with the curtain wall system. And that's why we had to use only those 3 different types of doors. So obviously if you had this pane of glass, something like 10 foot by 10 foot wide, that's how wide that door is going to end up to stretch into that panel. So you just have to make sure you divide it up in all these different methods. So for some of your townhome timeshare units or 2-bedroom units, I don't know, you might have, they don't have to just be a solid door and solid walls. You kind of think about some of the design of some of these. You might have some interior timeshare units that look into an atrium, and maybe they have more of a storefront glass in the front. Or, eventually if you look at the program, we do have retail space, retail shops, dining lounges, ballrooms, meeting rooms, and business centers, and all these other parts that are of the hotel unit that you might just, we're going to carve out some space for it that would be a certain square footage, and you might, think about how you surround, a particular meeting room or a restaurant. Maybe it's surrounded by storefront glass or curtain wall systems, that give you that visibility into it, give you something more than just chipboard walls everywhere.
Jimmy, how do you model countertops and things like that in those bigger units? Can you just load one on this one?
Yeah, so Revit, some of these other components, let's say I'm just in a floor plan view, Revit does come with, and again we can load these in, all these kind of components that would be such as sinks, countertops, even let's say casework, let's say you're modeling a kitchen. Let me just model some walls real quick. So I'll just model a corner. We can go under a component and load family, and I'm going to show you guys a trick. Once you load go into any kind of method from the project environment, whether it's through home and component and load family, or you can also click on insert and you also get that option to load family. If you enter into the US Imperial Library through that method, we can actually select multiple items and load them all in at once. And so under casework, for right now, I might go under domestic kitchen, and you can tab through, you see a bunch of these different casework items, cabinets, lower cabinets and upper cabinets. There's also some countertops with sinkholes, and some that actually have sinks already embedded within them. You can also go to certain manufacturers' websites, and you can actually download their casework components and look at, lab work. Lab casework is especially a good place to find a lot of this stuff. But I might just, if I want to do a countertop, I'll just use the countertop with a sink in it. Hit open, and when I place it, this is a countertop that has a particular set of instance parameters that were associated with it. Because there's instance parameters, you can click on it, and you have all these drag arrows that you can stretch and drag this into place. If I look at it in 3D, my sink and countertop is also automatically placed at 3 foot, which is a typical height. And then that also works, so level 1, if I'm in plan view, I can go ahead and load in, and this is where I'm going to show you this trick. Let me load in let me just do a base cabinet with 4 drawers. I'm going to highlight this, and I'm also going to pick an upper cabinet, single door with glass, why not? And hold in the control key. And by holding in the control key on multiple items, I can load both those items in at once. That saves you a little bit of time. And then again, you're just placing a component, and you can see right now I just get this dashed line for the cabinet. I can place that. If I look at it in 3D, there I have my cabinet, and then my wall cabinet works in the same way, but because it's a wall-based component, so if I select and find upper cabinet, it wants to be placed on a wall, and it works better in plan. So you can see if I'm not hovering over wall, it doesn't allow me to place it, but once I am, I've now placed that cabinet, and it's pretty much at the correct locations, and you can always go back and edit it further. So we'll get into more of how we can deal with those. But if you want to start planning, if you're looking at kitchen spaces, you can quickly create a kitchen by these countertops that are already there, and they're going to render with materials, or we can apply materials to them, and you quickly have some realism into your spaces without having to sit there and model all that, like what you'd have to do in SketchUp. You'd have to model the drawers and the sink and all that crazy stuff.
It's just nice to know the size, how big to make.
Yeah, and you can do that again also with plumbing fixtures like the bathtubs. Bring those in if you want to start to look at your bathrooms, that type of thing. For Thursday, I don't really have an assignment, but I just want you guys to keep working on your hotel. I just want to see some progress. I know you guys have already, laid out hopefully all of your rooms, but I know a lot of you have said, well, you kind of want to look at your timeshare unit a little bit more, and maybe it's not big enough, or you don't have enough square footage, and you still want to work out the design. Work out that module of those 2 rooms. Make sure you have it set. And one way to figure out if you have enough room, you could start placing, kitchen countertops, whatever, or your bathtub units that come right from Revit, and you start to see how much space you're taking up in those different areas. There's also furniture you can place. You can place beds. So if you want to start placing beds in the area where people would be sleeping, kind of see if you have enough circulation space. Just kind of test it out a little bit. I'm not requiring anything. I just want to see progress. And on Thursday, we're going to actually get into looking at how we can model ceilings, and then we need to talk about railings a little bit. I haven't talked about adaptive glass, and we need to still talk about column grids and get that placed into our hotels. Our structural engineer is going to be yelling at us pretty soon to get that information.
If you have kind of papered surfaces and kind of awkward shapes for all your components or all your, I guess, rooms that are groups, are going to have to be kind of each one tailored. Can you just read the math or is there a way to do that?
What regard, are you talking about the exterior? How
Yeah, the exterior. Paper and plans as well.
Should be allowed
So
to
there's
do
kind of
something.
curved front end and
Well, what I would do then, those exterior walls, you might think about